Good evening. My name is William Jones, and for this discussion post, I read Chapter 5 of George Whitefield, America's Spiritual Founding Father by Thomas S. Kidd. The title of the chapter is A Tour Around America, the American South, and the Bethesda Orphanage. So this chapter focuses on George Whitefield's second visit to America, which commenced late in 1739. He had been to America previously in 1737 and 38 when he visited Georgia right behind the Wesleys. But this is his second visit to America, but his first tour of the colonies. And he is already somewhat enjoying celebrity status. He is well known. His sermons are becoming well publicized in the American colonies. And so he comes to Philadelphia, and he gets off the boat there in Philadelphia, and while there in Philadelphia, he befriends a number of people, one of which is Benjamin Franklin, who's going to become, over time, one of Whitefield's greatest printers. He's going to print many of Whitefield's sermons and literature. Also there, because Whitefield was affiliated with the Anglican Church, he begins to preach in Anglican churches, and this at first seems good, but really quick, like they realize this is a problem because the Anglicans do not support Whitefield's style of ministry nor his style of preaching. And so he begins to hold open air meetings, and most Anglicans do not support him, especially in the southern colonies, according to Nick Needham in his book 20 years of, 2,000 Years of Christ's Power, volume 5, that focuses on the 18th century. But although he was not embraced by his Anglican brethren, especially in the southern colonies, he was embraced by dissenter groups such as Presbyterians, Baptists, and French Huguenots. These groups opened up to Whitefield. They embraced his preaching, and they loved his ministry. And he steps into a scene there in Philadelphia among the Presbyterians and the surrounding middle colonies, especially there in the southern colonies with the Presbyterians. He steps into a situation that is already experiencing revival, but also division. Division between the New Light and Old Light Presbyterians over embracing the Great Awakening that's taking place in America, or not embracing it. And so Whitefield's preaching really increases this division that's there, but it also promotes further revival and is used by God to promote further revival. And according to Needham in his book 2,000 Years of Christ's Power, volume 5, Whitefield especially targets unconverted ministers in his preaching. And this is something that really did not sit well with a lot of Anglican ministers, as well as some of the Old Light Presbyterians, that Whitefield emphasized being converted as a minister. Further developments also that took place while Whitefield was here, according to Kidd in his chapter here, was Whitefield's Calvinist beliefs. And this is going to be a parting of ways between him and John Wesley eventually. And his friendship with many of the Presbyterians developed at this time, most importantly with the Tennent family. Gilbert Tennent and William Tennent, very influential Presbyterian preachers of the New Light persuasion. And this influence of the Presbyterians further increased or further developed Whitefield's Calvinist views, and caused him to become more Calvinist in his leanings there. And this is something that's documented by both Thomas Kidd and by both Nick Needham in their books on George Whitefield, on the 2,000 Years of Christ's Power. Also Thomas Kidd's book on the Great Awakening also records this. Taking place at this time that's mentioned briefly in the chapter is the War of Jenkins' Ear, which, me being here in Georgia, where I'm from, it's very that's a close to home event for us here. Because the War of Jenkins' Ear several battles took place here in Georgia, and so this is going to cause there almost to be a sense of urgency around his orphanage that's being built in Savannah. A big thing that's really pulled out by Kidd here is the issue of slavery. His greatest encounter with slavery, Whitefield's greatest encounter with slavery thus far, was on this tour from Maryland to Virginia, and Virginia to South Carolina. He is familiar with slavery, been around it, but he had not encountered it in Georgia. According to the New Georgia Encyclopedia, slavery was not allowed in the colony of Georgia until 1750, although we know there was some contraband slaves that was already here. Kidd gives a lot of detail about Whitefield's encounters with slavery. He quotes about his quote about the Southern colonies, and this is Kidd writing here on page 100 in his chapter. He, referring to Whitefield, reiterated that the high prevalence of slaves and indentured servants, combined with the scattered nature of settlements, made consistent religious practice difficult for many. And it seems to give the reader the idea that Whitefield was bothered by slavery and may be opposed to it. Now, it seems to give this idea that some reason Whitefield is opposed to slavery. He doesn't come out and say that, but it's as if he is. It's giving the reader that idea from what he's saying that Whitefield's saying, and the fear that Whitefield has about certain aspects of slavery there in South Carolina, especially in post the years following the Stono Rebellion, which was the greatest slave rebellion in this part of the country here. But there's Whitefield biographer Robert Phillips records something a little bit different about Whitefield. The Whitefield he shows us in his early biography of Whitefield is not a Whitefield that's opposed to slavery, but it's more of a Whitefield who is comfortable with slavery. And if I may, I'll read this here. It says Phillips reports that a Dr. Giles received a letter from Whitefield where he described Georgia in this wise. And Dr. Gillis received a letter from Whitefield where he described Georgia in this wise. When able to look about him, he found everything bore the aspect of an infant colony. And what was more discouraging still, he saw it was likely to continue so by the nature of the Constitution. The people were denied the use of both rum and slaves. So it's almost like he's lamenting the fact that the colonists of Georgia were denied rum and slaves because of the heat and because of how rough the environment was here in Georgia. And he even writes to the governor of Georgia when looking when requesting for a land grant to found a college. Whitefield writes, a considerable sum of money is intended speedily to be laid out in purchasing a large number of Negroes. And so, while Whitefield is not opposed to slavery, Whitefield seems to the picture here that we have between what Phillips gives us in his early biography of Whitefield and what Kidd gives us in his later biography of Whitefield almost tends to be it's not two different people, but it is slightly differing here, because we see in Phillips's biography someone who is not opposed to slavery, someone who's comfortable with slavery and in fact owns slaves and is requesting money to buy slaves to build his college, whereas it's almost as if Kidd is promoting Whitefield here as someone who's almost anti-slavery. And when we know that Whitefield did advocate for the fair treatment of slaves, he wrote a letter to the inhabitants of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, according to Kidd in his book, The Great Awakening, to advocate for the fair and the right treatment of slaves. And that was a popular idea at this time among evangelicals, that we need to the Christians need to evangelize their slaves, and you see this also with ministers like Samuel Davies and others, Presbyterian ministers who had tremendous ministries to slaves in Virginia. And then finally, the Bethesda orphanage. The chapter concludes with the building of Bethesda and the work and construction of Bethesda orphanage. And this construction began on this tour with Whitefield here. And like the Wesleys, of course, Whitefield agitated the leaders of Georgia because of his over-eagerness to bring children to the home. The leaders of the colony of Georgia had just got over John and Charles Wesley being there and all the aggravation they caused them. And now here comes Whitefield starting his orphanage, and he's snatching children up out of homes that they said they were all right in. And so it's an interesting picture that's painted here, and someone he was trying to do right and to do good and wanted to help people, but then others viewed it as, oh, you're hurting people here. But this is a very good chapter, and I highly recommend it, on George Whitefield and a tour around America, the American South, and the Bethesda Orphanage.